Having the chance to play Immortals Fenyx Rising for about 5 hours last week, I can confirm that the game is open and vast, beautiful and stunning, complex and fun, but also seems to be missing that key element that really makes this genre of game great. In that 5-hour time that I had with the game, the first hour or so was brilliant and I think really opened up the world. But after that, you could really see where some of the flaws and some of the issue of this experience would be if you really were committed to it. Now, before I dive in, it's important to note that Ubisoft has been accused of fostering an unsafe and damaging work environment, with dozens of workers claiming they were sexually harassed or assaulted, and that powerful individuals at the company did nothing to help. There's links below that flesh out this sort of story further. What you do with this knowledge is up to you, but it is important to keep this knowledge front of mind when talking about this cutesy Zelda-like open-world adventure game. Now, Immortals Fenyx Rising puts you in the role of Phoenix, which can be either gender, as a story is being told by the demigod Prometheus to Zeus. So right off the bat, you're introduced to this unreliable narrator mechanic, which comes into the game a few different ways. Sometimes Zeus will take control and then the enemies you're fighting will be different. But it is actually irreverent. It is funny in a very well-meaning way without going a little too cringy. But since these two characters of Zeus and Prometheus are going to be in your ear the entire time, I'm wondering how stale eventually this sort of shtick would get. In the 5 hours, I thought most of the time it was refreshing, but if you're really trying to grind down and play this game, especially some of the deeper combat encounters, and you just keep having that Abbott and Costello, little twinge in your ear, I imagine it could get old after a while. In terms of gameplay, it is remarkably similar to Breath of the Wild. It's almost impossible to talk about this game without mentioning that. And I think fundamentally that comparison is where we run into some issues. It's big, it's open world, there's customizability options with the combat that you have. There is a wide array of different combat skills that are in different skill trees that open up as you play the game. In the 5 hours, I got to see the very beginning of the game and the conflicts that arise, how you're playing, and then I got a boost halfway through to see how endgame plays. And the distinctions in combat from the beginning to the end are massive. It's kind of strange because at the beginning, it really sells it as something that is an all ages adventure. But by the end, when I was fighting Achilles and the world boss Harpy, you required a level of complexity in your combat that I don't know if a lot of people would be able to hit. Clearly I'm maybe not the greatest at these sort of games, but it was hard when you're trying to get a real knack for the flow of combat. It's something that if you're not in the zone and it's not meshing right, you will easily be demolished by some of the more competent and difficult combat encounters. Now, the world is also very beautiful. Like we said, it's rendered to Greek mythology. You eat pomegranates for your health, blue mushrooms for your stamina. The combat encounters and people you find in the world are very cutesy and presented in this cell shading art style that is very endearing and I think really speaks well to this sort of game. Unfortunately, though, the character animations, especially during dialogue, can get really weird. It kind of reminds me of that surrealist feeling when you're watching a really violent and strange cartoon made in the Philippines that's supposed to depict North American life. There's something of a disconnect there. It doesn't quite look the way that it should. And that kind of undercuts some of the writing that I think is genuinely clever and fun and interesting. The overall narrative that I saw from the beginning is a little complex for the type of game that we're playing. Typhon, one of the Greek titans, is breaking out and taking control of the gods in this realm. But he's also reminding us as a mortal that the gods are capricious, evil beings, and that he's actually doing something good. So there's quite a lot of sympathy for the main baddie in this game, and kind of makes you question, why am I doing this? They give you kind of an ancillary motivation of trying to save your brother that is turned to stone but also like destroyed, so I'm not sure exactly how that would work, but it is more complex than I would have expected for a game that looks this way and plays this way. There is a huge focus on platforming puzzling, and it's a lot of fun. You get different skills that will allow you to maneuver these puzzles as they change in complexity. But again, I'm kind of brought back to the idea of who this game is for, because it's presented in such a all ages adventure kind of fun open world experience. But some of those puzzles can be difficult, and they do add a lot of puzzle mechanic helpers in the game system that I thought was really cool that other games should add. But once again, it just feels like there's all these different disparate things being brought together here that click in some ways, but then I'll hit a moment and just think this is so out of place. And comparing this game to Breath of the Wild, the biggest distinction is the lack of understanding, I think, on the part of Ubisoft Quebec of what made Breath of the Wild so interesting. There was a sort of artistic austerity about it. It had a heart to the world, even when it was empty and unpopulated. There was something interesting about the different locations and challenges that you fought in Breath of the Wild. The art style lended itself to telling a story through the way these characters were built, and that helped build an atmospheric experience. And I think Immortals, although it does have this beautiful open world, it is remarkably empty while not having that kind of artistic edge that Breath of the Wild did. And as much as they do want to focus on, navigating the world in interesting and compelling ways, I just think from my 5 hours, it truly tries to do that, but doesn't get close to what made that game, game of the year and something that was really lovely for so many different people. Ultimately, this is a game that I think will find an audience. I think it might even find an audience with some of the hardcore beat 'em up crowd. I'm wondering how it will land with those that are looking for an all ages adventure, but it is trying to tell a story in an interesting way. I kind of wish that they pushed itself and made stronger distinctions from Breath of the Wild than they did in this game, because I think if it kind of steered away from that and was more of a Ubisoft curated experience that wasn't just an empty open world, but even level designs or something like that, I feel like that might have worked a little bit better with what it's trying to do. More Rabbids than Breath of the Wild, but it is very interesting, and I think there's a lot of complexity here in how the combat systems are implemented and how it's easy to learn but very, very difficult to master. And the overall story is really interesting if you cut out some of the weird applications of like how their faces look and the lip syncing with it all. I think it's interesting because you have these gods that are seen as capricious and not well-meaning, yet we need to help them for some reason. It kind of puts into question our motivation, but it's still like I'm curious if they're going to commit to that, or if it's something that was kind of added while saying, no, it still has to be this all ages adventure. So I'd love for you to take a look and to see what you'd need from this game to work. If you're looking for an all ages adventure, should it be exceedingly difficult and kind of challenging in its narrative? If you're looking for kind of a Breath of the Wild atmospheric experience, should it be cringy and cutesy to the point of undermining kind of that exploratory way of looking at the world? Me personally, I don't think so.